Speaking of slain leaders, I want to ask you about Patrice Lumumba because, of course, Martin Luther King's birthday was January 15th, and Patrice Lumumba was killed on January 17th. So, can you talk to us about Patrice Lumumba?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Obviously, Patrice Lumumba, one of the great heroes of African liberation, he was the prime minister of the Congo, which now is known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and at one point was known as Zaire. And he too was assassinated. And his assassination, of course, has also been linked to major powers, the CIA, also Belgium. The UK has been in a softer way linked to it. There's sort of a long kind of history here, sort of the lead up to his assassination. Congo, of course, had become independent in 1960 from Belgium, and the independence was not really wanted by Belgium. It had come relatively quickly. They'd had to give up the colonies sort of, quickly and less than excitedly. So they had been doing everything possible to try to set it up so that it would be the most neo-colonial style of situation possible. But Lumumba and his party totally overturned that, and they were pushing an agenda that, some might call it radical. I you know might not necessarily call it that radical, other than the fact that they were, fighting for their right to be sovereign and make their own decisions. But they certainly were progressive thinking people there. And just like Sekou Toure of Guinea, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Nnamdi Ezekwe of Nigeria, Modibo Keita of Mali, all these leaders that were coming to the fore at that time who were, very critical of the colonial status quo, who were critical of the Cold War mentality, and were pushing very hard to make African sovereignty and post-colonialism real. And they also wanted to fight very aggressively against apartheid in Southern Africa, and in the then, which also included the then Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique, and also Guinea-Bissau. So, the leading radical edge of this anti-colonial movement that was sweeping the world at the time and was changing the world and was challenging the sort of post-World War II attempts of the United States and the West to continue to control the world, by taking a position that was basically neutral in the Cold War, if not soft pro-Soviet. And so Lumumba, who was, in this country, the Congo, that has tremendous economic power. I mean, so many of the minerals, it's like the number one source or right up there. It has huge hydropower potential as well that has never been fully exploited. And so for the Congo to go into sovereign, independent hands, deeply problematic, because the Congo has a lot of leverage over still to this day, over the major industries of the West, and a huge amount of the things that are coming from there. Now, the most notable one is coltan, right, which is a major thing for cell phones. But it's so many minerals, I can't even get into them. So rich as a place, and with a lot of other potential agriculture and things like that. So essentially, from jump, as we know, and it's now documented, the US, the UK, Belgium were like, this cat has to go. Like, just from his first speech, where, the king was there. Belgium has a king, and he just kind of went in, Lumumba, more or less. It was not like a deferential speech to his white masters, which was, I think, what they were expecting. So pretty much from the jump, they were against him. And there's a whole long point. If you really want to get into like the minute details, people should read Challenge of the Congo by Kwame Nkrumah, where Nkrumah goes through the whole crisis and his own role in it, which is illuminating. But there's a whole crisis basically for the whole time Lumumba is the head of the country until 1961. So he's only there for a year. And the crux of the crisis is that people were trying to bring him down all sorts of different ways, and that most of those people were backed heavily by Belgium and also by the Western powers. So finally, the country started to break apart, and a region in the south called Katanga was just the very rich copper region, still continues to be to this day, had seceded. And again, long story short, Lumumba is taken captive. He's taken down there to Katanga, and he's killed unceremoniously in a brutal death.
And he was
Many
35.
Yes, he was 35 years old. Listen, before we even get to the key point, which is like, did the US do it? Did the UK do it, or whatever? Kind of regardless of the actual details of him being killed in that moment, there's no doubt that the US and Belgium for sure, and perhaps even the UK, but definitely the US and Belgium were 100% responsible for this, because the only reason this sort of secessionist situation and the forces who killed him were around to do anything was because they were being heavily backed by the West, especially Belgium and Katanga, but also the United States, also others, including perhaps Franco in Spain, the fascists. So, there was a lot of forces. So it never could have happened without their machinations to destroy the Congo and to bring down Lumumba. Had they done nothing and just accepted Congolese independence, Lumumba would have not only routed his opponents, but gone on to live for who knows, maybe they would have killed him later. But certainly, it would not have taken place, at least not at that time in that way, and maybe never, because he would have become consolidated. So there's that. Now, there is testimony that exists from various individuals who were in the CIA that the CIA was definitely there, that they were there in the town that night. CIA agents, that they were in contact with the assassins, that perhaps they played a role, if not in ordering it and covering it up, and many pieces like that. There is definitely documented evidence that the US had already authorized an assassination on Lumumba. Like, if you get the opportunity, take the shot. Dwight Eisenhower did approve that. And it's also known that the Belgians, same thing, that they had approved it. They wanted it. They were saying they wanted to execute him. And that for sure, they also were deeply involved. There are these mercenaries that were basically Belgian military officers who were flooding into the country. Like, they had all these white Belgians coming in and French people to back them up against Lumumba and try to destroy the country. And they were saying, "Oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it. They're just mercenaries." But really, they were just demobilized Belgian colonial troops who they left the country and came right back, still probably being and then being paid by Katango, who was being paid by these big countries. So anyway, certainly for sure, it's possible the Belgians were right in there and the CIA was right in there and that they were standing there in the next room or something. Also possible they weren't there, but they knew it was going down. And then when it went down, covered it up. But quite frankly, when you look at the history of it, as soon as Lumumba was captured, it was clear he was going to be killed and that he would not be released. And even though it took there was a little bit of an interval between those times. And I think it's very clear that the original capturing just never would have happened without the role of the Western powers, and that ultimately they are responsible for what happens, regardless of their specific role. But I do think their specific role was very significant. And it seems very clear that their forces were very much in the vicinity. And, if they weren't there when it happened, they were there right after. And if they didn't know ahead of time, they were the first people to learn. So, there's a lot of questions about that, but there is no question that they were deeply involved. And in fact, in the U.S. and in Brussels, they have admitted that it is true that both governments were hoping to and trying to kill Lumumba. The UK, it's a little bit more circumstantial, but I don't know why they wouldn't, also want him dead in the broader context. Whether or not they were actively planning, I don't know, but definitely the US and Belgium were actively planning.